and it's an in-conversation session, so it's very relaxed, informal style, hence our nice leather comfy chairs for the panel, and you've also got nice red chairs yourself. So first of all, I want to thank the partners for this debate. They are the Royal Academy of Engineers, and secondly, Jaguar Land Rover. And this debate is also in association with the Big Potatoes Manifesto, the London Manifesto for Innovation, which I aspire one or two members, including myself and Norman Lewis, are members of. So very quickly to introduce the format, it's in conversation style, so it's not really a head-to-head or perhaps a more heated discussion, although I might try and make it that if I may, where possible. But it's about being kind of digging deeper, shall we say, around the issue, in this case innovation. So what I want to do is I will introduce the panellists, and then I'll do a very brief introduction to kind of remind ourselves what we are here for, and then we'll have a maybe 30-40 minute discussion with the panel. I'll throw out a few kind of introductory questions and see where it goes really. The idea is that we want to look at innovation in a kind of a broad sense in terms of its kind of more political, economic sort of context. And it'd be very nice to hear from the panellists and yourselves in the audience some other examples of work and projects you're currently engaged with, and perhaps how those two could fit together. So, without further ado, the panel we have for you today is, so on my immediate left, what I should say actually before I read this out, if you want to get a full description of these guys, please go to the Battle of Ideas website and our session page, where there are lots and lots of things they've done you can read at your own leisure. But for the time being, in the interest of time, we have Matt Johnson on my immediate right. He's the co-founder of Bear Conductive, associate Bread, which I'll let him explain what that is. He's also a graduate tutor here at the Royal College of Art, so it's very nice to get a connection here. He describes himself as a bit of a designer, a bit of an engineer, and most comfortable being split between the two. Bear Conductive, his company, is formed to pursue the potential of proprietary non-toxic electrically conductive ink, developed while attending the Innovation Design Engineering Masters at the Royal College of Art here. So that's very interesting. Maybe you can come back to what all that means. Next in my list is Norman Lewis, Dr. Norman Lewis, consultant on innovation at PricewaterhouseCoopers. As I said, he's also co-author of the Big Potatoes London Manifesto for Innovation. And he says he's recognised as a worldwide expert on future trends and user behaviours. So, you know, I'm only repeating what you say with regard to technology adoption. So that does sound quite interesting. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those ideas. He's currently working on innovation at PwC, and previously he was Chief Information Officer at Open Knowledge, a global consultancy on the emerging Enterprise 2.0 paradigm. Sounds interesting. Next on my list, in no particular order I might say, is Carl Pickering. This guy with a lovely pink shirt. Head of Electrical Research, Jaguar Land Rover. So leads a team of research engineers to develop a wide range of new technologies and features for future production vehicles. Amongst other things, Carl is named inventor on a wide range of international granted patent applications and is named author on many journal conference paper publications. Again, perhaps we can come back to some of those ideas in the ensuing discussion. And last but not least, we have William Webb, visiting professor, University of Surrey and DeMontfort University, CTO Neul, that's the right pronunciation.
Very well done.
Thank you. Fellow Royal Academy of Engineering. Neul, the company I just mentioned, are developing machine-to-machine technologies and networks, which was formed at the start of 2011. And incidentally, William has published 11 books, 80 papers, and owns 18 patents. That's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, my own description, I can't really compete with that, but I'm chair and I produce this session, and there you go. I also own, I'm direct and am the only sole employee of Thinking Apart Limited, which is a business consultancy which encourages companies to become more innovative in how they think about and develop their products and services. And I'm also, pleased to say, a co-author of the Big Potatoes Manifesto as well. So, as I said, this is a in conversation, so just a very quick introduction to what this is all about, at least in my mind, so we can get things going fairly swiftly. Let's just concentrate for one moment on the death of Steve Jobs. Oh no, not an Apple eulogy. But I think there's an interesting parallel perhaps behind what's happened with Apple recently to the debate about innovation in general, because on the one hand, Jobs was revealed I quite like this actually, to be quite obsessed about his competitors and in fact about destroying Android because they riled him so much, according to the latest biography of him written up in the press, because he largely accuses them of stealing his ideas, and he was the sole genius of that approach of mobile telecommunications. But secondly, for some time now, Apple, like many other mobile manufacturers in particular, have also become embroiled in many lawsuits that do more, I would say, to protect their ideas and urge them on to create new innovation. And one very interesting example of this is on BBC News website this week, is where Apple have filed a patent to protect how users can unlock a phone, or their iPhone, with a gesture. So they've actually decided that we want to patent that very physical act of how you use your touchscreen. Now, of course, for any other budding mobile manufacturer, including Nokia and Microsoft, who've just obviously produced another phone, that has massive ramifications in terms of how they can adopt and use the same approach in terms of how they develop their systems. So, in a way, innovation, in light of what Apple have become and are doing and even represent to many people, perhaps has become quite narrowly defined and lauded over very intense rivalry, which you might argue is very positive. But when we think of innovation, perhaps as it was couched in the past, the romantic past, and even to the article that you wrote recently, Norman, which I think makes a similar point, perhaps we forget the bigger social, economic goals of human progress when we think about innovation, and even economic development and its power to exploit scientific discovery. Everything seems to be in the age of Apple to be very much around using the gadgets that we now know and need, rather than thinking about innovation, what we might need for the future in a far more ambitious way. So perhaps that's something for you to think about this debate, about what is innovation good for. So perhaps even, are we placing too much burden on innovation altogether, where maybe economic growth isn't going to happen like it did in the past when we had big manufacturing companies to do it for us, and perhaps we're putting all our eggs in the innovation bucket in the wrong sense, and we should be doing something else. So, panellists, just a number of issues for you to think through. I will ask the very broad and general question, what is innovation good for? Who wants to go first? And I shall be timing for 30-40 minutes on this discussion. So, no one's offering. I shall pick. Carl, you look animated.
Okay, I shall...
And I shall move the microphone.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Okay, I shall attempt to explain my perspective of innovation. From a Jaguar Land Rover perspective, we see innovation as essential in terms of keeping our competitive position alive in terms of a highly competitive marketplace. There are a number of very specific things that we target our efforts on for innovation. We do try to openly play on the theme of Made in Britain. I think particularly within the automotive sector, Made in Britain is synonymous with automotive manufacturing. So we unashamedly do try to emphasise that where we can. I'll throw a few thoughts out as well in terms of what I think we need to do to continue to encourage innovation within the UK, in terms of making sure that we have targeted support, the right encouragement and promotion from the governments to ensure that UK PLC remains competitive in this area. For Jaguar Land Rover's part, it invests something like 1.5 billion each year in new product creation. But I think the point I guess I'd like to leave you with from a personal perspective is that innovation is really a continuum. It is for everyone. It's about observation, it's about experimenting, it's about questioning, it's about having fun and lateral thinking. So that's my opening gambit on innovation.
Okay, who wants to add to that? Okay. If you move the microphone more
Yeah.
towards you, then you are.
So I would say, in general, innovation makes the world a better place in some shape or form. And I can think of a couple of innovations that I'll probably come back to over this session that are, for me, some of the most significant of the last 50 years, include the internet. That's a pretty innovative idea. Took a long time to take place, but it's made the world a better place in many respects for most people. Another one is GPS satellite navigation systems. I suspect many of you use some form of sat-nav to get you here at some point today, and if not, have in the last few days. And we know how widely it's used to make lives easier. So you can think of many innovations that make the world better. One thing I do each year is judge the Wall Street Journal's Innovation Awards, which is quite an interesting exercise. And I think there's about 3,000 entries a year, of which happily the editors of the Wall Street Journal filter them down a little, and I get about 600. But it's still interesting to go through those. And of course, they're all done by people, by and large, because they want to make money from the idea. But many of them do actually make the world a better place. Quite a lot of them are around medical applications that help people. Quite a lot are around better security to avoid those kind of issues, better IT systems. I remember being absolutely intrigued by one which was liquid wood, whereby you could liquefy chips of wood, pour them into a mould, and it would set into a coffee table, and that would make life easier for consumers in third world countries, as long as they didn't spill coffee on it, because it tended to redissolve, so it needed to be laminated. But it was a great idea.
Could I just add, or throw in something to again think about? You're right to obviously point toward many kinds of innovation, and there are lots and lots of awards happening around the world, which capture some of these great ideas. So perhaps evidently things are going on. So is it just my problem that I'm perhaps too impatient, or that perhaps what we're talking about, some of these ideas, they're not perhaps big enough to create new industries or new sort of differences in the way we live day to day? Is that? I think. Do you recognise that or not?
So I tend to think of innovation with a cookery analogy. I think most innovations are people going into the kitchen, taking the ingredients that they find there and producing something different, but with the same set of ingredients. And those tend to be fairly small innovations. They can happen quite quickly, but they don't tend to change the world. They're little incremental add-ons. And every now and again, someone discovers a brand new ingredient, brings it into the kitchen, and makes something dramatically different. And those are the big innovations. They often take a long time for people to understand what they've got and experiment with. And the internet's the classic example of that. I mean, it's 40 years old now, and it probably took 30 years to come to the sort of thing that we really know, because some of these things are so different and so unusual that you can't just grab them off the shelf and deploy them immediately. And I think there is those two distinct categories of innovation.
I mean, Matt, you work in the sort of the design and sort of bring about a lot of these innovations together. Is that right? I mean, what do you think?
I guess I find the title of the talk problematic.
Okay, good.
Because I guess innovation for me is almost has almost no meaning as a word, because we tend to focus on the outputs of the innovation, right? And so we're looking at the symptoms. Like, no one would argue that the internet and GPS are really crucial, important technologies that do improve people's lives or make some people's lives worse, but they have huge potential to change the world. But I don't think the important thing is really the output. It's understanding the method by which those innovations occurred. And it's difficult to talk about this without then referencing the word innovation, but you end up in a kind of loop. But I think it's more, I think the cookery analogy is great. It's not, I'm not concerned with the dish, I'm concerned with the way the kitchen looks and how the chef was trained and how the kitchen is organized. And because doing one thing great once is good, but doing 1,000 things great and being able to create a system to do things great is even better. And obviously that's what so many corporations are trying to do as well. But that's why I find it difficult. What is innovation good for? I don't know. The internet's great for porn and other stuff, right? But it can also be great for Kickstarter. And GPS can be great for war, but it can also be, I don't know, it's quite a difficult question.
But in terms of what you are talking about there, I suppose getting the setup right, that's been quite a large debate recently, because there's this talk of the government trying to set up business parks, replicate the model of Silicon Valley to our homegrown Silicon Old Street roundabout, if you like. And is that genuine? Is that how innovation should be thought through? Is it so easy to copy the setup to expect the same kind of results? I mean, Norman, I mean, on that, and
well, no, I think it's impossible to do that. I think that's just that's cloud cuckoo land, to be honest. I think the problem with the discussion is that it's not so much about whether it's the outputs or the method. It's more, for me, the critical question is context, and the context is a cultural one. In other words, what's the framework within which we are trying to solve problems? That's what innovation really is about, and I think I agree with what other panelists have said, that you're trying to solve problems, and solving a problem is you find a new way of doing things, and you might find materials or whatever. The question is, what problems are you addressing? And the problem I think that's occurring today in society is that the problems that we are formulating as what we need to be focusing upon have become so lowered. They're such a low horizon in terms of what we should be expecting in the future, in terms of ambition, in terms of our ability to control the things that are important for us to control. Nature, for one, to understand materials better, to understand energy better, to have the kinds of ambitions that we had, that we saw, that prefigured the Enlightenment, where we had this belief in science and progress, that we could do all these things, where in fact today our culture is the opposite. Yes, we've become anti-science. We've become, we are now reaping what the environmentalists would call, the storm that we have created is coming back to bite us in the arse. The environment, climate change, and all of that stuff. Rather than saying, okay, well, if climate change is a problem, which I think is a debatable point, then why can't we use human ingenuity to solve the problem that we have partially created? And see us as problem solvers rather than as being the source of the problem. And I think that's the problem I have, for example, with Steve Jobs, and with the discussion around Steve Jobs, not with Steve Jobs. It was clearly, I haven't got a problem with Steve Jobs. He's not even around anymore. But he created beautiful gadgets and all of that. And I've been using Apple Macs for the last, God knows how many years, 15, 20 years. I'm a Mac fan, and I evangelize about Mac technology and blah, 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 and the design and everything is beautiful. But if you think about it, why is he elevated in the way that he has been? And what he actually has done is he's created some nice, cool gadgets around a very narrow space of human problem, which is about self-expression, entertainment, communication, etc. What has Steve Jobs done for the increase of productivity in the United States of America? What has he done to the logistics industry? What has he done? In fact, what intellectual property does Apple own? They might have some patents over business processes and all that, but all the technology inside their devices are other people's intellectual property, not their own. So, he's a great businessman, no doubt, and a good eye for things and a good leader, but an innovator on the level of Edison or whatever, please, come on, let's get real.
Just before William, you come back, I absolutely agree what you're saying, Norman, but surely then we are expecting too much of innovators in this climate to do anything only than sort of the incremental, the product-led design, which may be beautiful, but is not going to be transforming humanity in any great scale or other. So, is there anything else we can expect from them? Or if not, how do we get them to challenge and to take up risks that perhaps they're not sure of how to do right now? But William, you were going to...
Yeah, I'll cover this one. So first of all, I agree with very much of what Norman said, particularly around the idea of growing new clusters or replicating Silicon Valley. In fact, I was actually involved in an attempt to do just that in Lancaster, and it's just never going to work. Things like that happen through some sort of serendipity, and where they happen, we should really celebrate them. And I'm actually deeply involved in the Cambridge cluster, and that's a cluster that's doing pretty well. It's not quite the same scale as Silicon Valley, but it's not doing badly. And what actually the government should do, in my view, is really support the ones that are going well, rather than trying to build new ones and replicate, because that just doesn't work. You don't get enough critical mass to make that happen. But in terms of sort of grand challenges and grand people and so on, it does seem to me, actually, we'll probably come back to roles of government at some point, but some of the best innovations do come about due to setting up some big problem and trying to solve it. And the internet, to go back to that example, was done for that reason. It was brought about as a way of solving the problem of communicating were there a nuclear war. And I think there's plenty of opportunity now for government to set up some kind of a grand challenge around maybe what a smart city looks like in order to improve life for the inhabitants, make it more green, do all that kind of stuff, and then effectively stand back and let something happen. And in a small scale, the congestion charge, which I'm sure many of you hate, but actually brought about quite a lot of technical advance because it did move the goalposts. Possibly, yes. And then just to pick up on the sort of the people thing, of course the problem is most innovations happen with teams now rather than individuals, I think, because the world is too complex a place for one person by and large to do something. But you could point out Tim Berners-Lee for the internet. Now I know many other people were involved, but you could say, well, he was one of the seminal people and we should celebrate him as somebody who was innovative in a very different way, not in a commercial way.
Okay. I mean, Carl, are you a big innovation man, or are you on the car production line? How do you?
Well, for me, rather than the question, I guess, of what is innovation good for, I guess you could turn that around slightly and say, when is innovation successful? I'm in a very lucky position. I have automotive tier 1 suppliers, I have universities. They're constantly approaching me with new technologies to suggest that they might be of interest to Jaguar Land Rover. And what my team do effectively is evaluate that technology to find a good customer application. And where you have the combination of a new and unique technology push combined with a matching good application, i.e. customer pull, you tend to get the start of where innovation tends to be successful. Obviously there's a lot more to follow. Is it commercially viable, etc., etc. But that combination of technology push combined with customer pull is, or has served as a very useful, successful starting point.
Okay. Matt, anything to add to that?
I think the issue of grand challenges are quite interesting. I think certainly having the vision to make huge impacts exists, or these visions exist, and the one that keeps popping into my mind is various proposals for climate engineering, which is this proposal that we broke it, let's fix it in this huge, bold way. And I agree that it seems like there's a lot of different ways to debate that issue, but there's a lot of hubris, potentially hubris with that, and a culture that doesn't necessarily support something so grand. And then you have kind of private entities like the X Prizes that will try to support radical innovation, but those haven't really proved to be successful either. I think you can't seed these things, and that you certainly have to reinforce them when they occur serendipitously.
Okay, I mean, because for me, I certainly subscribe to the kind of grand challenge sort of thesis, but I'm kind of wondering wherefore then those ideas should come from, or where we expect, or who to kind of kick off the debate. Because is it really the case then that it's in the domain of government, for example, to spur on those kind of bigger picture challenges, infrastructure-wise and so on? Because I'm reminded of the Technology Strategy Board, which some of you may be familiar with, and they do pour quite a lot of money into innovation, but actually if you look at what they pour the money into, is all the usual suspects. It's like sort of sustainability and even old age. There's nothing wrong with finding better ways for old age people to live longer. But where's all those new other ideas going to come from? Because if you look at Cameron, Clegg and all those other quite grey, boring looking people, I don't really see them being very inspiring really, and even having any inkling of the future in terms of how you might want to live differently. So, to the panel, where do we start this debate?
Well, yeah.
Good. 1 point.
I mean, thank you. I mean, that's part of what we should be. This is what we need to do. We need to have a broader discussion about this than just amongst the people in this room. But I think it is a public debate. And if you think about it, I think one of the first things we have to do is to try and understand what are the barriers today. What is it that's holding things back? And I think, here I'm sure there'll be as many opinions on the platform as in the room as to what the real source of the problems are before we can think about how do you tackle this. I'd throw out a few. These are my perspectives. I think that in business, the problem we have in business is that we have now a business culture which is risk averse, which is very short term, which is very instrumental. In other words, very much where it's part of the kind of short-termism, very pragmatic in terms of where it will invest. It has no kind of medium-term or long-term perspective in terms of where you would invest to try and reach a goal that you don't know the answers to yet. I think in government, you have the similar kind of lack of ambition. You know, if you think about, just look at the way they are looking at this problem of the recession, and everything is about regulation and reining things in, rather than, you know, how can we grow, how can we generate growth to get out of this. So that ultimately that's what we're going to have to do. You can see that even within government there's this very short-term instrumentalism, and I think that's the culture that we're in. So part of the solution is, you know, trying to understand where has this risk-averse short-termism come from. You know, where's the vision that will take us beyond what's immediately in front of us. You know, I just want to add one just example of this, just so people can understand. Maybe you might disagree with this example, but if you go back to the space race, if you go back to the 50s and the 60s in the US, okay, forget the context was the Cold War and all that, doesn't matter. When you get the President of the United States gets up and paints this vision about going to the moon, and basically argues that in the course of doing this, that we will solve many problems that we don't even yet know exist, but we will find solutions, and we will find new problems and new solutions. That is a kind of, my God, think of that as a vision for innovation. Think of that where he's basically saying, you know, discover new knowledge, discover new science, discover, and through that, what happens as a consequence of that? At least 50 to 60,000 companies are created. New industries are created as a consequence of this. New knowledge, not based on the existing knowledge, etc. And that's what I'm talking about. You know, and that transformed the education system in America. It inspired a generation of scientists, of mathematicians, of physicists, chemists, etc. Where's that going to come from today? Where's that vision?
So, William, how do you respond to that? Agree? Disagree?
Mostly agree. So you asked the question, where does the grand challenge come from, and how do you make it work? And to my mind, it has to be backed by money, basically. And there are things that encourage people to innovate which are not money-led, awards and so on. But for the most part, if you want some really good innovation, you need some money to purchase, some purchasing power to encourage people to go and do things that are risky and get some reward from it. So it's got to be someone buying something, essentially, or trying to procure something. And that mostly means government, really. So all the examples we talked about, the space age stuff and the internet and GPS, are all government purchases. So I think it's down to that. And if you look at what tends to happen, it tends to be an individual who's prepared to stick their neck out because they're mayor of a city and they want things done in that city, or they're the president or something. And they've got to be someone who is very sure of themselves because the odds are it's going to fail, and they're prepared to take that flat. And they've got to be able to have the charisma to carry it off. And there are very few of those, but if we find them, we should support them.
I totally agree with what you're saying, but are you saying, in general, though, that innovation right now must be driven by necessity? Is that, you know, to get that funding, to get that perspective? Is that?
I think necessity is too strong a word. I mean, did we need the iPhone? It's driven by the possibility of making money. I think. I mean, that sounds too strong a word. As I said, there are some people who innovate because they enjoy innovating and because they want to win a reward and so on. But to my mind, a lot of it is driven by the profit motive. The fact that if I do something, I may well make a lot of money as a result.
I agree with that. I mean, again, for others to come back to, but obviously we live in a fairly short-term, you know, culture when it comes to revenue generation. So, again, you know, how do you make the argument stronger in the long term? Because obviously a lot of these innovations take 20 years to come to fruition, as we know. So, you know, what would you add to your argument to kind of make it a longer term?
Work over the longer term.
Yeah, which is realistic, right?
Yeah. That I think is the difficult area that we've touched on it a few times. So with startups and venture capital and so on, you can possibly extend to 10 years, but that's a real push. More likely it's shorter than that. And as we talked about, a number of big companies are now much more short term. If we go back 10 or 20 years, many large companies had large research labs. You know, the classic one was Bell Labs, AT&T's Bell Labs, where the transistor was invented. And they funded those because by and large those companies were monopolies. They were monopolistic telecoms operators or whatever, so they could afford to fund those kind of things. and they had a long-term vision. That's an innovation.
That's an innovation in technology.
And you know, one of the fundamental changes is that we have moved away from monopolistic to competitive world, by and large. So capitalism has driven us towards increased competition. Increased competition pushes down profitability, encourages short-termism, and that brings some advantages. It brings lower prices and so on, but it does make longer-term investments.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, I think that thinking about scales of innovative ideas, right? So obviously the space race. It's hard to think of something at a larger scale than that. But I think the context for that is really important because it wasn't about profit, right? It was about competition, you know, and it was about fear. And so that's a really important piece of context, I think. And I think that you're right that a lot of it can be commercially driven, but I'm thinking now of things that are innovations that happen at quite a small scale now that are quite open, aren't driven by profits, but as soon as that enters the equation, they become highly infected, and then become either dangerous or ineffective. And a few of those are kind of open mapping projects, ocean mapping and testing projects, and a few climate projects that deal with groups of people trying to take data on the ocean and develop techniques to fix it. The issue is that to implement them with any real success, you need a huge infrastructure to do it. You need a government to take this tiny idea and do it 1,000,000 times to make it work. But I think that's a really important transition. There are 10,000 people on the internet who are all working together to do something. They're not motivated by the money, but they're also not going to get all that far without it.
Because I think you've drawn on the other very important trend, which is this idea of taking that a bit further beyond the sort of scientific collaboration realm, which is more the amateur drive innovation forward, where companies who aren't able to invest huge sums of money as they once did in the past, now in effect do the customer push-pull sort of scenario to kind of get their customers to collaborate with them. And that's a very prevalent, you know, kind of paradigm, shall we say, right now, which I'm not so sure about if you can ever deliver a very big, grand idea. So, you know, again, Carl, you work in that sort of environment. I mean, how do you respond to that? Can we rely on customers to tell you how to drive the car, or do you want to tell us?
Well, we certainly do listen to what customers want.
Sure.
But the issue is that the customers are not always aware of all the technologies that are available, so it's very difficult for them to articulate what they might want. But just picking up on a couple of the points about looking for this vision, this leadership.
Speak up a bit.
I'm not so convinced that when Percy Shaw invented the cat's eyes back in the 1930s, or Fleming, you know, invented, you know, the penicillin, and you can go back to many other great individuals. I'm not sure if they were needing this vision, Faraday and the laws of, you know, electromagnetic induction behind the motor. I think it was born out of individuals fundamentally trying to solve a problem. They weren't sitting there waiting for any great leadership to come and point them in the right direction. So for me, I think it's more a bottom-up than a top-down, or perhaps a combination.
I mean, Norman, slight sort of counter to your point that people don't necessarily need a big idea, a big framework to fit into. So, you know, is that right? Or
I'm not suggesting that they need the government, somebody painting a vision for them.
Yeah.
But I think the moments that you're talking about are moments where there was, more broadly in society, a culture that was looking to the future, that was trying to solve big problems. I mean, you know, I love the point you make about the research labs and all of that. Just the very idea that a company would have a research lab that they would invest in where they did not know what the outcomes were going to be, but nevertheless invested millions in these environments where they got the smartest people they could lay their hands on and said, play, do something. They didn't say, where's your business model, like they do today, you know, what's the expected product, you know, how much are you going to sell, and if you can't sell X amount in your second year, you're not going to get the money, you can't do it, forget it. stick to with what we know. That's the difference. I think the point I was trying to make about the space race is that it's not that President Kennedy allowed people to do this, but that the horizons, the ambition behind the problem solving was big. In other words, if you say the problems are small to solve, we'll solve small problems. The question is, how do we reinvent the notion of the big idea being the legitimate thing that we should be thinking about? How would anybody today justify in any boardroom anywhere in the world? I mean, I'd love, I don't know if there's any CEOs here or chairmen of boards, invest in a research program which is not tied to a development program. You think about that for a minute. I don't know if there's any company in the world today who will do that. There would be no justification that there's no...
We do.
Good.
So, I mean, and
if you're a startup.
Yeah, we're a startup.
Yeah, which is fine, which is what startups should do. That's
but
great.
we're also a startup that I certainly take your point, but we're also a startup that sees itself growing quickly. We are growing quickly and sees itself growing a lot in the future and trying to maintain that ethic of... So I look at it two ways, because one of the things I do is I tutor at the RCA, and we really encourage this idea of the kind of pedagogy of not knowing, because we intake a lot of engineers into the course, and they would love for me to say, you know what, all you need to do is cross this room with like 10 toothpicks and a cup of water or something, and they would spend all day trying to figure out a cool way to do it. And inevitably there's some maybe radical or a lot of iterative innovations, but it's this idea that actually you should be comfortable not knowing what you're supposed to do with this palette of materials, and you should do something, but then you should also be great curators of yourself to say, this thing we did is almost totally worthless, that thing's really interesting, and we should figure out who that might be interesting to. So, oh, you know what's interesting, so what do you think about this? And for us as a business, it's really important to continue to instill that.
I just want to throw out one more thing to the panellists for another couple of minutes before you bring your good selves into the discussion. Because maybe it's a bit of a caricature, but I always think of innovation about stuff as well. Stuff which is physical, touch, make, and whatever. Dig out the ground and transform. But where I'm working for a short while, I can't mention, but they make big engines and they go very fast and they fly planes. They are spending an increasingly more amount of time in their business, less around engine development and innovation, but more around the servicing of those engines for their customers. In fact, that's becoming a more profitable part of their business than the raw manufacture and innovation, R&D of that stuff. So, am I a bit old and romantic to think of innovation about stuff? Or can we also consider it to be about those other peripheral service type activities? Because I know that lots of motor manufacturers are very keen to hire out and lease cars rather than make.
Yeah,
I'm not saying Jaguar Land Rover, but...
Well, I love stuff. Absolutely love stuff, and it's the most interesting area of research. And ultimately, I think, as I mentioned, the best stuff that we research is that the customers interact with, where we find a match of that customer need. So we are playing with all sorts of different gadgets and technologies all the time, and it's stuff-based, to use that term. But it only seems to go forward, quite rightly, when it does have that commercial viability that you refer to, when it also meets a known customer need, or it improves safety, or makes the driving experience more enjoyable, or makes the engine more fuel efficient. So there has to be a matching of product improvement with matching a customer need and that commercial viability. You get that blend right, and the stuff has a pretty good chance of making it through to production. A lot of research doesn't get there, and that's why it's research.
Okay, William.
So you're quite right that a lot of innovation is not actually product at all. You can go back to Henry Ford. What was his innovation? It was a production line. It wasn't a new type of car. And in fact, probably those sort of innovations are actually more valuable because they bring better economies of scale and things like that than any others. And in fact, one of the big problems actually with capturing how much money is spent on R&D is What about the R&D that's to do with innovation of processes? You don't see that in a lab anywhere. That's not people with Bunsen burners and test tubes and things. That's something quite different. But nevertheless, it's innovation and it's new ideas. But it's hidden behind the scenes for most people. You don't see that, except in terms of cheaper goods or goods that have better quality or something like that. Or financial innovation, which we saw plenty of, to be far too much of over the last few years.
Okay, Norman, you a stuff man or a process man?
Well, I think it's a false counterposition. I think I love stuff as well, and I agree with most of what's been said. But the real problem for me is that the stuff pipeline, if I can put it that way, is getting smaller and smaller, and we're concentrating more and more on narrower and narrower areas. So, this kind of self-obsession we have now with ourselves and our personal communications, and so everybody's looking at how we can make better, smaller devices that you can express yourself on, and you can. The real problem is that all this stuff that we all love and we enjoy is based upon previous knowledge and existing science and material science and etc. And we're all exploiting that. But where's the next stuff? Where's it coming from? I mean, there's a number of breakthroughs that we've had recently around materials for future, which is really exciting, and that's great stuff. But my biggest concern, and again, I'm beginning to sound like we're all doomed. I'm actually quite an optimistic person in real life, but my biggest concern is that where's the next generation of scientists? Where's the next Einsteins? Where are the next people that are going to give us the new knowledge upon which we're going to solve tomorrow's problems? And therefore, what I'm really saying to you is that I don't believe that the stuff that we've got today, as good as some of it might be, is where it's at. I think we need better stuff. I think we should have better devices. We should have better designed implements in our homes. Our cars should be better, etc. They should be more fuel efficient. They should, etc., etc. The aspiration has got to be not what we've got is enough, but it's not enough. It's not that our technology is bad or it's good enough. Our technology is not good enough yet. Our aspiration has got to be for better, and also understand that this is a pipeline. This is a whole value chain. It's a supply chain. It's everything from the education system right down to what you use in your kitchen.
Okay, thank you very much, panellists. Now it's your turn, audience, to tell us what you think, to give the panellists a hard time, agree if you're stuff merchants or if you think innovation is not useful at all. I'm interested in everything you've got to say, basically, to kind of help us to develop the argument. What I'm going to do is take rounds of questions or points if you need, and then I'll bring the panellists back hopefully 2 or 3 times to respond to what you're saying. So who wants to speak? There's a guy here, guy there, lady there. So first of all, yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised that so much of the discussion has seemed to concentrate on this very sort of small-scale innovation, something that you're railing against. I mean, it seems to be locked into a commercial, ever updating the new phone, ever buying a new car because it's got some new gizmo on it. It's like, it seems to be so short-sighted, because especially at the moment where the vast majority of people haven't got the money to buy a new Jaguar. I mean, well, I wish I had. And I don't want to buy an iPhone, but my Android will have to keep it going for another year anyway. But it's like, where's fusion? Where's the artificial photosynthesis? These are the things that could completely change the world as we know it at the moment. Make the biggest problems of climate change disappear almost overnight. It's like, I find it surprising that at a place like this, when we're talking about innovation, what we're really talking about is incremental product improvements.
Okay, that's a good opening question. Did you still want to make a point?
Yep, I wanted to Norman Lewis. How about we're all threatened, it seems to me, health service costs going through the roof and driving taxation through the roof. How about actually calculating, I think it's been done, but we could do it for the UK, what each disease costs the economy in all sorts of ways, and directing research in a big way, saying, right, we can take billions, and the health service costs 120 billion already, and people like me are starting to get into our 60s, baby boom people, what the costs are going to be like in 5 years' time when shut us to faith. And try and really go all out to get preventative medicine. That would be a huge project, that would be a huge amount of innovation, and you'd see the effects. in no time. Secondly, on your question of materials, my understanding is the problem is so complex, you probably need quantum computers to do it. And that's got to come first. And that is being worked on. But it's a heck of a long-term problem, because I saw buckyball, which was just a small thing but pretty complicated, has just a small new material. Materials themselves are incredibly complicated things to do the billions of equations and so on. So I do think there's a huge problem there. Thirdly, if I could just say...
Just be brief. We'll get more
all right, I'll stop.
All right. There was another guy who wanted to speak who... Yeah.
Everyone's talking about these massive ideas of innovation. You know, in the Wall Street Journal, do all the innovations have to be completely new innovations, completely new ideas? Because say computer parts or something, they every year upon year, they get half the price, you get twice as much. But is that publicised, or is that just kind of an assumed thing? Is that innovation, or is innovation just completely new synthesised ideas?
And last for this round, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to ask the panellists, what's the best piece of innovation, whether process or stuff, you've come across in the last 5 to 10 years?
Good question. I'm under pressure a bit, I hope. Right, so panellists, do you want to come back to some of these points? Choose whatever you want to respond to. I know you're all scribbling away, which is good. Who wants to start off? William?
So I'll pick the easy one about the Wall Street Journal question. What is innovation? There's actually what I think was quite a good definition of innovation was actually coined by the UK government, strangely, which was the successful exploitation of new ideas. And actually there's actually 2 keywords in there, successful and new. In terms of what makes something innovative, I think it's back to the cooking analogy. You've got to bring the ingredients together in a different way. So a hard disk drive that's a bit better than the previous one isn't an innovation if all you've done is to carry on a process of making it better. But if you brought in some completely new technology, a new material to coat the disk surface with or something like that that has enabled a step change, then that would be classed as an innovation. It's one of those, there's a lot of grey areas in there. I just want to pick up on the health service, because that's clearly the ageing population is potentially a grand challenge for society for fixing that particular problem. And you're quite right, there should be enormous scope for innovation there. But we live in a country where the health service still sends letters. You have to wait for your GP to send a letter to your consultant. I mean, what kind of a country is that? How far behind is the health service? And we did try and fix it, didn't we? We spent 7 or 9 billion on an NHS IT service, which is 10 billion, which has now been given up on. So that was an attempt to innovate in the health service, which went badly wrong. Okay. And innovations do fail sometimes.
Fine. Who wants to respond to that, please?
I think I'd just like to respond to the gentleman that made the point about incremental innovations. And I think to a large extent, yeah, absolutely right. We have an era where many sectors have got incremental stepped innovations. And in some respects, you could include the automotive sector in there. But what I would say is don't lose heart. If we look at the big mega trends that face us today in terms of electrification, low carbon, I would say sit tight, hopefully you'll see something. If we take vehicle connectivity, where our vehicles are seamlessly connected to our homes and offices, again I would suggest sit tight. And finally, with regards to electronics in generally, coming down in price, becoming much more complex, from a vehicle safety perspective, again, I'd say sit tight. Personally, I'm very, very optimistic, but you're right, we are now poised already for that next big new thing. So I absolutely agree with you.
Okay. I mean, Norman, we're talking about small fry things right now. The guy was saying, where's the big fusion ideas and so on? Is that true? Do you want to use that switch to microphone?
Yeah, that's true.
Fair enough.
I mean, that's really the point I'm trying to bring to this discussion. Again, I think to some extent there's a bit of a false counterposition, because we talk about incremental innovation and stuff and all of that. Of course, incremental innovation is all incremental, in the sense of, you're always building. It's like that statement about standing on the shoulders of giants. We're building on the accumulated knowledge and expertise and science and everything of the past. And that's how it should be. The problem is that we're now reaching a cultural point where we're actually saying that we've got to the point where what we need to know, we know. and anything beyond that is going to be dangerous, and anything beyond that is arrogant, and therefore we shouldn't be doing the things that you're suggesting. We shouldn't be doing thinking about quantum computing and what that might do for the future in terms of research and the things that will come from that, which I think will be immense. And so you already see that there's a kind of even a narrowing down of the fields of that fundamental research. It really struck me when we were writing the Big Potatoes manifesto. If you looked at the Hydrogen, the Collider, and you go onto their website and you look at how they justify what they're doing, they're already talking about this is going to have immense benefits for society, you know, because what we might do is we might invent something which you can use in the kitchen as a consequence. And I say, well, who cares? I don't. If that's going to give us insights, new understanding of how the world works, physics, at an electron level, that's going to open the world like, relativity did, theory like Einstein, like quantum itself, how that emerged, how that created new boundaries, and which indeed was the basis upon which we built the whole computing industry, electronics, etc. Is all down to those guys who did that, who pushed it. And by the way, when they were pushing it, no one was saying to them, what's the outcome? When Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, no one said to him, well, that's very interesting, but what's the business model behind that? That's the kind of crap you get here in every discussion you have in any corporation or whatever. It's all they're looking at that. So my point is that, yes, that's precisely what we have to do. The debate we need to have is, I think it's numerous. I think, for example, we should be saying, how do we inspire the next generation of kids to get involved in science? How are we going to get, where the next generation of scientists they're going to give us fusion or going to make those kind of breakthroughs in stem cell research or whatever? Okay, there's one sitting here. That's great. But the point is, why would kids do that today? Rather than, well, I go and work for Apple and I'll be fated as a great designer and all of that, and that's where the money is, whatever. There's a very big values discussion to be had around this as well. It's not just it's a political discussion. It's an economic discussion. It's a complex question, but I think that's where we've got to start.
Okay, Ola.
So yeah, I guess I would ask to the gentleman who's asking about where's fusion. How was your email in 1992? Meaning that, did you immediately, the day the internet opened, did you go, this is going to change the world, I see it, it's coming? Clearly not, right? Because it didn't have the context, it didn't have the support, it didn't have the momentum. It probably wasn't until Netscape 6.0 that you started using it. And so, as somebody who is part of that next generation, it almost, if we were to only focus on the innovation where everyone here seems to be looking, it seems quite dire. But for me, it doesn't seem dire. Sure, if we look at big corporations, it does seem quite iterative. But if you look at projects that seem almost bespoke and small, but actually have quite big impact, and I'm thinking specifically about open hardware projects on the internet, that actually these are quite significant things. And maybe the device itself isn't really that significant, but the behavioral change is the significance of it. So I think we have to be careful not to associate the object with the behavioral change. And then the other thing I wanted to add about materials is certainly there's a huge amount of innovation in material science now, but there's a few different levels. There's innovation from the level of basic science, which is what you're talking about. But that is quite deep and requires a lot of work to produce some sort of true innovation out of it that we can understand and we can use and that can really change us. But there's also a lot of materials innovation by designers, which obviously I would include myself in that category. But there's quite a good culture in London of materials innovation by designers where the innovation has an immediate and important context. So there's two projects that I would mention. One is a project called Subaru. It's a product, right? It is a commercial product, but the ethos is this idea of reusability, right? And the woman who runs it is very, very good at kind of understanding the way that we interact with objects. And this simple material innovation, which is a material that allows you to repair things very easily, creates a huge behavioral shift, right? So yes, it's just one company, but it's an important shift from a simple object. The second thing is a project that is basically is a hybrid materials project developed by another designer that has created a whole new material, a whole new palette of materials that are subject to a lot of PhDs. I think there's like 6 people doing PhDs on it. So when I heard you say, we need quantum computing for it, we need a lab and a big pile of stuff and time.
Okay, who else wants to speak? Let's see more hands. So, you want to speak? Hold on. Just getting logging the hands, as they say. So, yeah, go on.
Well, I mean, I agree with Norman in the sense that.
Speak up.
Yes. I agree with Norman that we are going through a period of low ambitions, but you mentioned the Large Hadron Collider, and that's a really exciting project, and there are a lot of scientists who are asking very big, important questions. So, in the sense that the scientific world is still trying to find answers for big problems. Is it the case that where the problem lies is that in order to justify funding, even at the educational level, you have to put in your criteria and what you're going to be researching, and it's the political ideas, it's what's seen as worthy of being invested in is the problem. So if you can justify your research is that it's going to help the environment or whatever, then that's okay. If it has no immediate sort of problem solving, then it's not that at the individual level people have given up on science, and young people aren't going into science with still that same ambition. It's, I suppose, you just learn to play the game as you go along, and that's one of the problems. And also, so even patents is like a very sort of tricky issue, because I don't know if people saw the BBC4 documentary on electricity, and Marconi ended up patenting all of the ideas, pretty much stole the ideas of like 100 years worth of work by scientists. And so now people are much more, because in that period everybody shared their ideas, and it was like collaboration and built on the work of people before you. But now everybody's much more protective, and sort of just doesn't want to, that whole sort of sense of building and working with each other isn't there anymore.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, lady with the red jumper.
Bill Gates said if half your projects don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. When I worked in the labs, I worked on the idea of 10 ideas, maybe we'll take one further. Well, one of the ideas that did go further was fibre optic transmission, so I've got eeny, meeny, beeny bit of a Nobel Prize in that.
Very good.
But you do need a backup, and something I did learn in the last few years. I could rent a 200 square foot wet lab from Imperial College, great. But I've lost touch with my friend who was doing this microwave stuff in the shed at the bottom of his garden. There's so many sort of rules and regulations around. I mean, what about a thorium-based nuclear-powered merchant fleet now? That will solve a lot of the fossil fuel problems. But it's the regulations and rules everywhere. Congestion charge meant I abandoned a complete new business venture. But the things that are coming out of the EU now, the idea of not being allowed to modify a motorbike. Well, how would I test a thing if you can't modify anything? How do I test it? And I've got a lot of ideas of getting a proper car that fits me.
Okay, thank you. Right, at the back, James, I know who you are.
Well, it's easy to denigrate small innovations, but I think air conditioning, acoustics, tiles that didn't look Soviet, lights that lasted, and the emergency exit light in a basement that you could see. We need all sorts, and I'm all with you on fusion. I think one point that's never made about Apple is that they're sitting on a cash hoard of more than $70 billion. So if you want to reduce everything to economics, go right ahead. But there are some cultural problems there, what Norman talks about in risk aversion, which you can't explain that cash hoard, and it's true throughout Europe as well as America, without deep-seated inhibitions against innovation. Now, if you take the title, many inside this room we might agree on things, but outside the room, environmentalists will tell you innovation was an intrinsic part of the Industrial Revolution. That led to more inequality. Innovation in the shape of high-speed 2, the high-speed rail system, will just be for the rich. Innovation is mostly bogus. It's to do with planned obsolescence. And so there's a deep hostility to innovation, which is regarded as almost un-British, really. And if you think we're going to have new nuclear power in this country anytime soon, I think you're wrong. If we had a high-speed train that actually went to Birmingham, I think you'd be wrong, because it's not going to Birmingham. Some people would say that's a good thing, but you know, so we do have this broader cultural prejudice against it, and we need to be aware of the world out there, which is much more hostile than we imagine. Now, I think with the exception of Norman, my friends and the panelists, all of whom I want to consult for, I'm going to insult you first. First of all, Mr. Jaguar, you talk about product-market combinations, but if you take the Nobel Prize winners of last year who developed graphene in Manchester, they didn't talk about product-market combination. They didn't say, oh, look, is there a user need out there for single layers of carbon atoms? We've got the technology, so let's match it. I think that's, with respect, despite your lovely cars, a somewhat conservative vision. You, sir, I believe, talked about, or maybe it was you, clusters of innovation and Shoreditch Roundabout and all of that business. The idea of clusters of firms in the same industry working together, drinking in the same Silicon Valley watering hole, that was pioneered by Michael Porter of the Monitor Group in 1990 in The Competitive Advantage of Nations. 21 years later, we're still talking about clusters, and we're still talking, by the way, about smart cities, which the main idea is to lower obesity. We're already doing all of that stuff for the NHS, calculating what diseases cost, which is really an instrumental attitude to it. The main disease we've got out there, apparently it's catching, is obesity, and they've quantified all what that costs, and we try to get the behaviour change. Not the innovations where if you take RFID tags in hospitals, 9% of a nurse's time is spent trying to find where that X-ray machine has last got to. We put that in hospitals, you can call it small or big. That is a productivity-raising innovation in services.
One more point, because we...
No, that's the last point, Mark.
Okay. Guy in the blue shirt, you still want to...
Yeah, well, just echoing one of the points there, innovation is about change, and some people don't want it, put it as simply as that. So certainly some of the smaller changes that you were talking about, there's often a pull because people are expecting the changes. But in other areas where you need a bigger change, talk about nuclear power, the big changes over the last 20, 30 years have been in biology. That's where things are going to come over the next 30, 40 years, 100 years or whatever. But there's lots of resistance to that still. And so we've got to work on how do you change. And I won't even mention we need some political innovation, political change, because we're stuck in mechanisms that have been around for more than a century, and change is required there.
Before I take the next woman in, is it the case everyone here is for innovation? Are we a unanimous audience? I'd like to hear people who are opposing in some way or other, because the guy James sticks his hand up again. I'm not going to take it again.
I'm against some, if I may just briefly say. When Tony Blair said we need eye-catching initiatives, and if you go to the health service or the education system, you get a new innovation each week. We should be hostile to that, because it's bollocks. Management innovation is usually the opposite of innovation.
Good point, and I'll finish my point as well. In the sense that, does anyone support the environmental sort of perspective that James did raise, which is we are increasing too much waste, creating too much waste through all these unnecessary innovations. So I'd like to hear all those perspectives as well, so that we do have a well-rounded debate. So, sorry, hold on. Did you want to make?
Yeah. Even though I think I sort of know the answer to my question, I'm going to ask it anyway at the risk of looking a bit dumb. I'm interested, particularly from Norman's point of view, is since the manifesto was written now, a couple of years ago, have you detected any shift on changing culture for the positive? My experience, for example, of going around schools recently is there is a very big shift, even in the last couple of years, to try to get back the 3 sciences, for example. So I'm just wondering at an instinctual level, even if the overall horizon is bleak and against innovation and all the rest of it, at an instinctual survival level, in the context of a recession, is that not starting to possibly suggest the fact that Europe has to get a bit more of a grip? And then in the context of the stuff that's been in the news recently about companies sat on piles of cash, not innovating, not investing, does seem to push the argument back the other way, but I'm just wondering where the
Okay.
balance is currently.
I just want to get 2 more questions in before bringing the speakers back to respond. So there's a woman here and then the lady there. Yes, so if you...
Thank you. There was a time when academics looked down on academics that did applied science because it was a little bit dirty. I was just wondering if we should go back, if you actually should go back to old school researcher mentality, which were purely drawn by the joy of knowledge and finding out about new things, rather than, because we brought universities and industry so close that academics now think in money terms rather than the joy of knowledge and leaving industry to come and pick up those innovations, and whether that's a limitation.
Okay, and do you still want to point?
Yeah,
Sorry,
so,
no, actually the lady behind.
Don't worry, because I was going to raise that point actually as well, and you, to do that kind of research, you need somebody to put money into a black hole. Something might not come out of it. So who's going to be willing? It's the risk assessment exercise.
I say blue sky.
I have to do all the time. I have to put my time, my grant money into a black hole. Something may not come out. My career may disappear down it. You know, you've got to get people who are willing to put money into that black hole.
Yeah. Is your point quite brief?
Yeah, just to say on the environmental issue. So it's not all about just creating waste. There are big innovative industrial systems ideas like cradle to cradle, things like that, where you can build all devices. But the way funding is structured around gadgets means that we can't have big industrial systems innovations.
Okay, I'm going to panel, so lots and lots of points to respond to. Measurable outcomes, patents, failure, I'm touched on. Rules and regulations, very good point. Should that be our target? And even companies who hoard loads of cash, why are they doing that? So, William.
Okay, so we've talked around quite a lot now. Is there too much small innovation, not enough big innovation? And certainly I think there's plenty of small innovation. So back to my experience on the Wall Street Journal, I've been doing that for 10 years and I see no shortage of small innovation. Big innovation, I'm not quite so pessimistic. I mean, for example, the human genome was decoded in the last 10 years. That's a pretty big innovation. That could lead to enormous change over the next 20 or 30 years in the same way that the internet was an innovation that led to other things. So there's always room for more, but I'm not utterly pessimistic about that. And there is, of course, the gap that people have talked about between stuff that happens in a university and making it into reality. And I think that gap is where, in the past, the old industrial laboratory type things worked. But there are some replacements. I mean, Google, for example, may hate them, but things like Google Earth, Google Street Map, fantastic innovations, not really done with any great profit motive in mind at the time. It was kind of, this could be a good and neat idea. We all use those kind of things a lot. Google is another company that's almost a monopoly and therefore able to be a bit more forward-looking. So I think we have to accept a few of those monopolistic kind of companies in order to have some venue where ideas can be taken from universities and moved into reality.
Great. I just want to encourage speakers to be a bit more brief so we get more questions in. Yeah, Carl?
Okay, well, I'd just like to maybe come back to the point on, is the industry too conservative in its vision for innovation? Perhaps industry doesn't articulate or publicise enough a lot of the speculative research it does. We work with some 40 universities. We sponsor many tens of PhDs purely for knowledge building. There's no product at the end of it. They are to improve our knowledge gaps in strategic areas where we acknowledge we are missing specific details. And those PhDs are very speculative, very far-reaching. For example, looking at user interfaces that require zero visual demand. So instead of customers having to look down to operate switches and controls, is it possible to do that without any visual demand? That would improve safety. A clutch of PhDs looking at advanced battery technologies. Is it possible to get higher power density, smaller, longer lasting battery technologies? So perhaps, I'm actually quite comfortable that I don't think industry is too conservative in its vision. I think there's an awful lot of very good companies out there that are doing speculative research, and if they're not, they should be.
Okay, so thank you. Matt, any?
Sure. So I guess I can't help but notice a kind of pessimistic attitude, which we all are referencing. But I also can't help but notice that seems to be purely generational. I don't feel particularly pessimistic, but everyone who does feel pessimistic seems to be of an older generation than me. And I think that's probably because they're not particularly engaged with contemporary issues and looking in the right places. What I mean is that we, and one of my business partners is here, and I hope that she would attest to that as well, that we're both very optimistic about micro and macro innovation. We see so much amazing stuff happening all the time, and it comes in the form of goofy new products, but it also comes in the form of fundamental cooperation internationally around really big, meaty problems. It's not profit motivated. It's not driven by a corporation. It's driven by an interest in the problem and the satisfaction in sharing something that you did with someone else and working together on something. And I guess the conversation to me seems to be focused around the Wall Street Journal. The journal's great, but it doesn't really pay attention to what's going on a day-to-day basis, right? It's still a print publication. It's not as contemporary as the kind of media that reflects these constant continual innovations. So I just had to point that out, and I'd be interested to know during the next question round what the kind of someone of a bit younger generation would feel about that.
Okay, I like that a lot. So Norman.
As a younger person.
Sorry, Norman.
I hear the naivety of youth.
Oh, dear me.
I don't agree with this generational thing. As it happens, I said earlier, I actually am very optimistic about the potential and of the human condition of mankind to solve, all the big problems, etc., etc. But I think you have to face up to the political and cultural reality of the times that we're living in. I think that lady over there made a great point about all the regulations and the risk and everything. The sad reality is this: Fleming would never have discovered penicillin, because if he had been working in a laboratory today, he wouldn't have been able to leave anything out on his bench and go on holiday, because health and safety would have said, you can't do that. This is a threat. Now, I'm making a joke out of this, but it's actually a very serious point. It's precisely that, because when you start to inculcate risk, and I don't, whether it's young people or old people in the laboratory or not, once that becomes the framework, what you're essentially doing is you're already closing down the potential of the knowledge that could be discovered, or the breakthrough insight or whatever. And therefore it means that what you're really doing is what cannot be known will never be known. And so when we reduce what we think is the knowable, I'm sorry, I'm beginning to sound like, what's his name? I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit abstract. Then what we're doing is we're reducing the pool from which these things can happen. And that's what I'm concerned about. So I have no doubt that there's some great things. I'm just talking to you before this about what your company's doing is great. There's some great stuff going on.
Let's let Matt come back to you.
I think that the combination of both of your points is really important because, and someone else mentioned biology as well. I mean, biology is an incredible space for innovation, but it is hampered by rules, regulations, and funding. And I think that, again, what I was trying to get across is this idea of open innovation. You would have a very hard time accessing wet lab space at Imperial, especially if you're going to work with human tissue. It's an extremely difficult thing to access. And you need to be governed by grant and subject to all the ethics, which are of course appropriate. But if you look at a space like GenSpace NYC, which is an open lab, it's a wet lab, it's only a level 1 lab, so you wouldn't be able to use human tissue, but it's publicly funded. But its ethics are determined by an independent panel, and you would be allowed to leave there. You'd be allowed to work there. You'd be allowed to leave things open at overnight, right? I mean, and that's the point. Is that's biology that everyone can engage in, and so that to me is the exact example.
Okay, William, just a quick point.
So, just on regulation, I used to be a regulator. I worked for Ofcom for 7 years.
I didn't read that out actually.
So, I agree with everything that's been said, but the basic problem is the more you've got to lose. So, would you be happy if I at Ofcom had allowed an innovation that had a 20% chance of knocking your television reception off the air? Would you want that? Depends what the innovation is, doesn't it? I mean, if the innovation is going to save the world, you might. If it was an innovation to produce a slightly better iPhone, you probably wouldn't.
If it got rid of Channel 4, it would.
Yeah.
Putting mine off next year anyway.
Okay, so I've got a few people I know who want to speak, and who else wants to speak who has... Right. Right, so who's next on the list? Yeah, you don't want to, okay, fine, I'll pass the baton over. Nico, sorry, guy behind you first, and I'll take you.
Hi, Nico MacDonald, manifesto co-author. Just on penicillin, we should bear in mind that penicillin actually came to be productised through the Second World War and through the leadership of Florey and the team at Cambridge. You know, it wasn't just Fleming at St Mary's. I wanted to respond to Matt, because although I'm a little bit older than you, I've been involved in the internet industry for almost 20 years now, and I've observed a lot of the kind of open innovation models and collaboration across the network and so on that you talk about, and I suspect that we know a lot of people involved in that. And I would observe that it does have a bit more of a character for me of kind of play and a little more internalised kind of innovation, if you like, and it's not so, doesn't feel like the kind of grand projet, if you like, that really going to transform things. There are important aspects about these kind of models of working which will be very important in the future and already are, but my feeling is, I mean, if you take some popular products like the Arduino, which is an open hardware platform, or Patch Bay, which is a product for internetworking, physically internetworking spaces and so on, they've got a huge potential, but the way in which they're used tends to be a bit trivial and a bit playful. So I'm not sure the will is there. And I'm interested in Norman's point about kind of vision. We had a lot of Kennedy on the television in the last year or so, and the speeches he made and the space vision and so on. I wonder, I'd be interested in each of the panelists' point of view about whether that kind of grand social technical projet is appropriate today, and if it were appropriate, what kind of projects we might propose. We've had one about looking at preventative medicine, which was poo-pooed by my colleague James, perhaps. Are there other grand projets that we should be thinking about, particularly in the context that next year the eyes of the world will be on the UK in the context of London 2012? And, what a great chance to launch some kind of initiative that would capture people's imagination.
Okay, thank you.
University tuition fee. What's the opinion?
Can you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, just what's the panel's opinion on university tuition fees? Would it be more sponsorship of graduates? And could it all be done on the Open University?
Okay. There's a guy at the back. Did you? Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to know what you think is more important: innovation to make our lives better and easier, or innovation to make better our wealth of knowledge? And if so, would then that mean innovation in making things more efficient play an important role in both working quite well?
So it's kind of knowledge versus just making our day-to-day. Right. There's two hands at the back I saw. Sorry, yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk of people, companies like Google and Jaguar, who have a lot of cash doing black hole research with no immediate benefit. What stops a small engineering company with perhaps 12 staff or 20 staff from doing exactly the same thing? How do we make those sort of companies start to innovate? Because there are people out there with those ideas who just run around getting the day-to-day jobs done.
Okay, and there's another hand near you before. Can't see anymore, but... Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. Who had their hand up? Sorry, let's you, Paul, and then I'll take you. So, guy there, yeah? Did you have your hand up with the orange?
Orange, oh.
Orange
I think
necklace,
innovation is being stalled by the fact that the next innovations are going to be, you're going to need multiple degrees. I've just started in hybrids, and I find most people that have mechanical backgrounds, and I'm an electrical engineer, I'm the specialist in my department, and I'm still a student. I find it very bizarre that things are moving that way.
Okay, and then Paul, I know...
Okay, I kind of had two things to say, and I'm trying to work out which one I should say.
Just say one, because I want to speed things up.
There's been a lot of talk about, it's a half-baked thing, but there's been a lot of talk about the sort of products that are produced nowadays that are sort of aimed at the personal. And I wonder if there's a lot of problem, and part of this is almost historically British, that innovation is often seen as very personal. People think of Barnes Wallis or or Frank Whittle or someone like that in the past. But nowadays, to me, innovation should actually be, is basically real serious innovation. It's got to be a team thing, and this is why I have a bit of a problem with the open hardware type thing. You can work with a bunch of people that you get on with, and you have great ideas, and you can suddenly walk away from it if you don't like it. If you work in a really innovative company, you probably hate the people you work with, but you have to fight, and that's the only way you're going to get the real big innovations.
Okay, thanks. And guy with the blue shirt.
I was just in reference to somebody else asking the panel what they thought was the greatest innovations that they witnessed in the last 5 to 10 years, and also things such as like Tesla's form of electricity generation, and also things like geothermal as alternatives to electricity generation in like the light of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And so why things like Tesla's age-old electricity generation device hasn't been a popular worldwide thing that's been used.
Right, anyone who wants to speak? Right, panellists, if you come back quite briefly, then we'll get more questions in. And one thing to kind of reiterate Nico's question to yourself, I mean, I would like you to respond at some point, what is your vision, if you've got one? Where would you pose it?
Okay, well maybe I can
come back to you.
Yeah,
okay. To be brief.
Two in one then. Okay, so
good.
I think, what's the grand vision, and should we have a grand challenge? Yes, I think is the short answer. We should. In terms of specifically, if we take the automotive sector, I could probably mention two or three. Number one would be, well, I'll keep it very brief. Number one, a car with 0 emissions will be a very good grand challenge to have. Number two, a car that never crashes will be a very good grand challenge. And number three, a car that doesn't break down. I think there's 3 very good big grand visions there, and speculative research as well as product-focused research will continue to try and address some of those.
Are we saying in order because we always speak the same? Do you want to say?
Sure.
Just quick response.
Was it Nico, right? Yeah, I would say that it's not the Arduino that's the innovation, it's the application of the Arduino, and I think you're right, there's a lot of playfulness, that's great, but there's also some really serious stuff. Making sophisticated electronics open to everyone means that everyone's ideas and everyone's problems can become important. To your point, I don't agree that a team has to fight to be successful and has to dislike each other. I certainly think creative friction is positive, but I think that model.
I wasn't saying that.
Yeah, no, okay. I mean, but you were mentioning creative friction, and I don't think that the open source community is one where people abandon as soon as they're bored. That certainly hasn't proved to be true. Tuition fees, the bigger the pot, the better the ideas. It should be free.
Brilliant.
So to come back to grand challenges, I'm really in favour of these, and I think actually we're in a different era now. We're in an era where the world is being threatened. So the grand challenge is not to make our world better; it's to make sure we keep it alive. And the two that obviously come to mind is the global warming challenge and the ageing population challenge. And I think both of those are absolutely ripe for grand challenge kind of government incentives to really get something done there. And that I think could lead to a lot of innovation that actually helps the world rather than just gives you a better gadget that you enjoy, which is a very nice thing to have. I mean, I've got plenty of them myself, but we've talked about the superficiality of all that. Quickly on the team side of things, yes, most things are now getting more complex. It's why we see more teams of people and less individuals, and they are getting interdisciplinary, which means we need mixed teams to come together, and that does happen. And then a very flippant answer to the fees question. If it encourages more students to drop any courses with the word studies in and pick up things like engineering, then I think actually it'll be a good thing.
Norman, quickly.
Fully agree with that point. Well, grand visions, yes, I'm all for them, and I think we need them. The problem is you can't just pull them out of the hat. I think it's more trying to understand the barriers that we have and what we need to do to begin to engage that public conversation to try and shift the thinking. If I think about what's the greatest things in the last 10 years or whatever, I think very much high up in my list would be the Collider. I think because I think the potential of that for discovering the new realms of physics and science at the atomic level is going to have huge implications for the future, and I think that's got latent potentiality. To throw another one out, which is
be quick because we need to some more.
7th billion person who's going to be born. Great, welcome. I think that might be the innovator that solves a lot of these problems. In other words, 7 billion innovators. I think that that's what should be welcomed, and I think the vision should be re-articulating the human being as the problem solver rather than the source of the problem.
One thing to throw out. I mean, are we also saying innovation should be, kind of reiterating Norman's point, a worldwide phenomena? Because many people actually argue that it's all right us doing it in the West, but when we think of the Africans or the Indians or even the Chinese innovating to our standard, surely that's going to cause more problems than benefits if we give them the same cars, the same technology. So something to throw out. So that was my question. So any more last minute points, questions that you want to raise? Okay, not you yet, but guy at the back, yeah?
Yeah, just to ask a question related to what you just said. Suppose an African comes up and says he's just created a substance like an envelope that would stop a car from crashing or an aircraft from crashing without being taken seriously.
Okay, is that okay? Anyone else who hasn't spoke? No. Who wants to speak? Make a quick point. Disagreement? Come on, there must be someone else apart from James and Paul.
Mine's only short.
Go on, lady in the red jumper. I know you want to say.
I was talking to Professor Raymond Tallis the other day about disposed of my body when I go. Why can't I use my tissue? Can I give it to somebody when I've gone, just to cut up? I don't care what happens to it.
Are you talking to me direct or anyone else? Yep.
I've spoken before, but I think we shouldn't confuse invention and innovation. I think there's been some confusion here. Innovation is about change. Lots of inventions. You might have an invention to do whatever, but it's actually then getting it into practice. And that's often the most difficult thing. I mean, it's a trite saying that people in Britain very good at invention, but not very good at innovation. And actually, you know, the Chinese and the Japanese have been much better at innovation, perhaps less good at invention. So
okay.
It's just my grand challenge for Carl in cars is a car that travels at 200 miles an hour. Oh, actually, we've already got one. Why haven't we got the roads and the infrastructure that allows us to drive around at that speed as well?
Okay, any more questions? Okay, James?
Well, just a brief point. The kind of innovation that is culturally valued today is recycling, and the more time you can spend your work on raffia and stuff like that, the better. But there's one kind of recycling that is never talked about, which is very much on the grand scale that you propose, sir, which is to get hold of the CO2 that Britain made in the Industrial Revolution in the atmosphere, air capture, and turn it into fossil fuels, well not fossil fuels, but car fuels for Jaguar cars. Now I'm pleased to say that Virgin, who is not on the panel so I can really insult them, has a prize for it. It's a Virgin Earth challenge to get hold of CO2 and turn it into fuel. How much money are they putting behind that, what do you get? The answer is $25 million. In other words, a bathroom for Roman Abramovich in Mayfair. So I think it is important, although I was critical of you on the numbers front, I think it is quite important to get hold of the numbers, just to see the Lilliputian scale of what they want. You know, that could really transform climate change. And yet there they are, you know, it's certainly cheaper than Richard Branson's private island, even if you should get a new sweater.
Any other last points? Yep.
The thing he's talking about is called a tree.
A tree? Is that our last contribution, a tree? Okay, think it is. Go on, Nico, very quick point.
Well, I'll just come back on William's response to my challenge, if you like. I think if Kennedy had said, we're going to go into space to stop Earth being destroyed by the Martians, which, you know, after H.G. Wells and Orson Welles, he might have, I don't think it would have had the inspiring effect that, you know, I think we, there are interesting challenges to be dealt with. We need to think about the upsides of dealing with them rather than just dealing with the downsides. And to come back to our discussion of Apple earlier on, Steve Jobs, if you read Isaacson's biography of him, grew up in Silicon Valley when it was becoming the center of innovation that really was the fuel of the space race, when companies like Fairchild and Intel were setting up, and HP and so on. And, you know, that was, you know, military initially and then space. And, you know, everything that we're dealing with now, you know, it flows from that, which was a point that Norman made. And maybe biotech is the new thing.
Okay.
I don't think it's got quite the dynamic that 1950s California had.
Thank you very much. So, panel, I'd just like you to try, if you may, if you can, to summarise and pick up your favourite point to respond to in a minute or less each. In fact, can we do maybe 30 seconds? I know that's a tough call because we have to get out of here very shortly. So who wants to go first and to sum up?
I'll just go on the fantastic point that was raised about not confusing invention with the process of innovation, and I'm absolutely with that. And I guess I'd just like to end on the fact that despite the somewhat negative aspects of the discussion, I and many researchers I know remain very optimistic that innovation is alive and very well.
Okay, thank you very much. William? Yep.
So I've ducked the question so far of what my favourite innovation is, because I think everything that we touch around us is an innovation in some sense. So it's almost like saying, what's your favourite thing? But you know, is it personal? It's personal. It's my bike sat-nav system. I do lots of cycling. It's fantastic. Is it for the society and for the humankind? Then it's something like the MRI scanner. But the world is just full of zillions of innovations. That's the way we live.
Thank you. Norman?
Well, I think that I think we just have to raise our horizons. So when somebody says, well, why can't we have cars that go 200 miles an hour? Or we have got one. The question I would pose back is, why are we thinking about cars in the way that we do? Why aren't we thinking about entirely different transport systems or different infrastructures that would be completely transform the way we live? And that's what I'm trying to get at. That's the kind of vision we need. We need things that are going to take us out of what we know and what we're comfortable with, because it's only when we go beyond what we know that we will discover, the real important things and the things that will improve. I think the final point is that my point about innovation today and about a vision, I think what we've really got in front of us is not climate change and all of that negative stuff. I think we've got to get out of this recession. We've got to get out of this economic mess that we're in. And so I think anything that's going to go towards increasing productivity in the workplace or whatever, creating employment, etc., that for me is what is immediately in front of us.
Thank you very much. Last, Matt.
I guess for me it's really about, as Norm was just saying, the scale of the idea, but more than that, the communication of the context of the idea, so that we get a large public engagement, so that these open frameworks are effective, and so that the problem matters to everyone.
Fantastic. So can we give our speakers a big round of applause?